Welcome to Behind the Audition podcast with your host, Curt Hilton. Listen in on interviews with voiceovers, filmmakers, producers, animators, and much more. Curt, a voice actor himself, will give insider tips to the business, talk with guests about how they got into the business, and be sure to stay tuned to the end of the podcast when he challenges his guests with a pop-up audition. Now it's time for Behind the Audition podcast. Here's Curt Hilton.
Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Audition with Curt Hilton. That's me. And I'm excited to have you back, listeners, viewers on YouTube. And I have a fantastic guest today. We were talking through email last year. I was going to have this next guest on last year, but things couldn't work out, unfortunately, on my side. So we have him this year. And the stories you're going to hear are amazing. And I grew up outside St. Louis, so I grew up a St. Louis Blues fan, and he actually got drafted from the Chicago Blackhawks, the rival of the team there. And we'll talk about that shortly here. But you've heard this gentleman's voice all around, and I'm just going to bring him on now. Coming to the show, let's welcome Kasper Michaels. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, and thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you for the opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah, you're over in the UK, right? You said you're in the UK.
I'm a Canadian that's sort of over in the UK now.
Nice.
And it's a different. I'm actually considered I'm kind of a token American, is what they call me, kind of thing, because it's sort of like listening to Australian or Kiwi. Unless you're around the accent, sometimes you can't tell the difference unless you live there, and then. So I get to do all the fun stuff. I get when they ask me to be the North American guy. And it's like, yeah, that's okay, fine. I guess I have to be transatlantic is the global term they use for it. I don't know what that means. Does that mean like I'm from Atlantis or something? That
I think transatlantic, it's kind of funny. The first thing I think of is the show Schitt's Creek. You know what I mean? They have supposedly a transatlantic accent.
Which is really funny because Schitt's Creek actually takes place on the other side of Canada, and Canada that accent is more of it's a very Canadian accent. There's certain things that happen in that accent that don't happen in any other accent. It's called Canadian raising. It's a particular phonetic term. It's the way we say roof and house, whereas you would say roof, house. So it's where you get the Toronto. That side of Canada.
There's no emphasis on T.
But it's very Canadian specific. When I first started acting, I was asked by my agent to lose that.
Okay.
Because I was living in Vancouver at the time, and all the work that was coming up was from LA. They used to call Vancouver Hollywood North.
Oh.
And she said to me, she goes, "You need to, if you can, lose as much of your Canadian as possible." And I went, well, what I didn't understand that at the time. This is the 90s. And I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? Little things that'll give you away are words like sorry. Canadians will say sorry, and an American will say sorry. Little things like that. Now, most people won't get that, but there is someone out there who will go, you're doing an accent. And so, or you're not that guy. And I never wanted to be that character who was caught pretending, I guess, is the way to do that.
Right.
So it's the transatlantic is actually, it comes from the 30s. Cary Grant, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, they all spoke in a transatlantic accent. They were taught to speak that way.
Is that the big boy thing? Hey, I was looking at you, big boy.
Yeah, kind of.
It or was like meow, see, meow.
Yeah. They brought it in. They brought it into. They were going to teach this new dialect that was supposed to bring all the classes together. But then they didn't realize that what was happening was you had to go to school to learn to do it, and so only certain people were going to be taught that accent. And what ended up happening was it became a class divider rather than a class bringer together. And the sort of like the way RP did in the UK, which what they call received pronunciation, whereas only people who went to school were taught to talk that way. So it was all posh people with money, and it divided stuff. So now we're actually at a point now where you're from is actually really important. They want to hear your natural accent, and I love that. I think it's fantastic that we're back to finding out that even in the United States, people think there's only like 1 or 2 American accents. There are lots.
There are. Well, there are, you know, and it's so funny you say it because, you know, I grew up 25 miles outside St. Louis, and I talked this about my wife because when I first met her, she lived in Minnesota for a while, and she had a little bit of it wasn't total Minnesota accent, but it was kind of like, you know, she'd say "foon," you know, it wasn't a boot or anything like that. But I had Em O'Neill on the show, and she's from up in Toronto. And I know there's no T when they say Toronto. See, I'm even doing it now. But would you say it's kind of funny? Chicago in the early day, you know, early 40s, but they had accents too in Chicago, the Minnesota, the Wisconsin.
You know, the thing about, you know, where accents come from? It comes from migrants who come over who can't speak the language very well. So in Chicago, where they used to make fun of that on Saturday Night Live, where you have the Bears, those guys, that's because you had a bunch of guys come over from like Poland and stuff who couldn't say their T's, and so if you've ever heard a Polish person trying to talk English, they do a lot of, they talk like this, they don't say the T. So the Bears, they do this thing. And now what's happening is, when we're getting into, the world is opening up with the internet, you can hear how people talk now, but as well, migration wise, we're now dealing with like 3rd generation people who are grown up here. So the accents are actually disappearing. You don't hear like, you know, like the Bronx and stuff like that. Those guys who talk like this, because a lot of that's those guys that, you know, they had relatives who come over from Italy and things where there was an accent thing happening. And now a lot of those accents are disappearing, and they're becoming something else. Actually, they're morphing into other things because the Ute of today.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny you say there actually was something came out that there was a lot of people from New York getting upset. People thought that's how they talked in New York, and the new generation do not talk like that.
Yeah.
And then that's so funny because I remember watching the movie The Untouchables, you know, and it seemed like most of the police officers had that Irish accent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I can totally see that that does make sense.
You know,
but,
the irony of that is Sean Connery does the best Scottish Irish accent, and then he's in The Hunt for Red October, and he's a Russian Scot or a Scottish Russian. And it was sounded like, at the time, you kind of go, why are you casting someone who can't do the accent to do that? And it was just like one of those things where you kind of went, you know, like Kevin Costner when he did Robin Hood. All the guys in that movie were fantastic actors, but not known for their accents. So, you know, it's the very first time you heard like an American sounding Robin Hood amongst all like these very well-trained RADA English Shakespearean actors. And then it made them like, you know, it made them stand out so much because their accent was just so different.
Right.
Than everybody's. Yeah. I love accents. I love the way that languages are formed that way. And I love even little things like doing Mysteries of the Abandoned, which is it's a very interesting thing because it's written by Brits. The producers and the teams are British, and I record it here, and for an American audience though. And I'm Canadian. So we have these conversations every so often going, how do we say this word? And we'll go, and sometimes we have to look it up. Some like little things like you could get it. When we first started, we got into like 20-minute conversations with like, you have a term like anti-missile. And you go, what's the big deal? And then somebody goes, well, isn't it anti-missile? And you go, I don't think it matters. And they said, well, it might. And then somebody will go, what about missile? And you go, stop. Because
data is a big one.
Data, route,
like
just little things. And you find out that some of these words aren't as important as you think they are. And some of them are more important than you gave them credit or kind of thing. And you're like, oh, darn it. And like, I get fan mail from people. My fan mail is actually kind of funny because it usually is commenting on my mispronunciation of a word, which is really funny, which I love it. I answer back to all my mail when I get it, but still you kind of go, but at the same time you go, they were listening. You know, if they're listening and they're taking the time to actually, I don't get like trolled. That like if somebody's going to troll you about your pronunciation of a certain word,
Yeah.
That kind of trolling is okay.
Right. Well,
Like
so that brings up a good question then. So whenever you have a client send a script to you and somehow you may think you might say it differently, is the first thing you do you reach out and say, look, would you like me to pronounce this, with this or that? Or would you send them
yeah,
like a sample recording? Do you think
that's
that's a good idea?
that's a very good question. It's sometimes it depends on the client, and sometimes it depends on the country you're dealing with. For example, here in the UK, I have a lot of German clients, and German clients have a tendency to send you scripts that have been straight out of Google Translate. So they don't make a lot of sense, kind of thing. Sometimes you will get scripts that to you don't make any sense, but their PR team has spent days on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I will do with a script when I get it, unless there's something that just doesn't make sense whatsoever, you record it exactly how it is, and then you could, when you're sending it, you could go, if you would like someone to go over the script with you, kind of thing, because you also don't know if what you're getting as an audition script is going to be the final script.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the final script and you're in an actual session with a client, I would then say, are you sure about this line? I just want to make sure this isn't a typo.
Mm-hmm.
Or you say, is this the final script, or are there any more revisions? Because some clients don't take it very well to the talent offering suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the client asks for a suggestion, that's perfectly fine. So that's a tough water to cross for me. I guess the best way is, if it's an audition, I usually record what I've been sent to the best of my ability, and then I will send that back. Um, if it's something that, again, if it's closer to final, like they say, yeah, you're the guy, we'll send you a script, and then you get it, and you look at it, and you go, okay, this is looking a bit dodgy. So what I will do then is usually I will record one that's exactly how it is, and then I will go, what do you think of this? And I'll give them another one. Or I might contact the client right away and go, I just want to make sure that you sent me the final script. If you have, could you check this line for me? Sometimes they might say, and this happened with a client just the other day. There was a line that I was concerned about, and they said, we know exactly what line that is. That line comes from head office. That's exactly how they want it said. We don't agree with it, but it's how they want it.
I had that happen not too long ago. It was for a commercial spot, and I was with 4 people on the session, and the script, I read the script, and after they heard it, 2 people didn't like how this copy read, and then 3 people were like, well, this is how they want it. So it was kind of funny. They had a debate on the session, and me and the other actor were like, okay, well, what do we do? And so
that is the type of thing you know what you a good thing a good thing. I've been doing this for a while now. What I usually do is, can I suggest we record both?
Right. That's what we did.
Yeah. And we'll just say, then you have them both. Because that way you can eliminate, and in fact, it's what I do in Mysteries of the Abandoned. I'll usually go, if we're going to get into a discussion about certain things, we know we're in a time frame, kind of, and so I will go, how about we would just record one for safety? I don't mind doing that. It's usually no skin. It's when you start wading into how they should do their copy, which is what I did when I first started, which is why my beard is gray. because I didn't start this way, because you learn so many lessons as you start. But that's the fun part. That's the fun part of this business, is everyone is different, and I had a golden audition, or actually a golden session just last week, where I went in, the client was late, they handed me the script, I hadn't seen the script, and they needed it fast read. So they had too many words for the amount of time that they had.
Wow.
And they said, "Can you do it?" And I went, "Well, let's give it a shot." And I did it first take. And the client went, uh, we've got an hour. I don't think we need any. And so we just screwed around for the next 15 minutes, and
Yeah.
we tried to see how fast I could get it. And I'm knocking all types of wood and metal in here. I didn't make a mistake that entire session. That never happens, kind of thing. But for this session, it just did, because what was happening was where we were at was it didn't matter anymore, because we'd already got the tick that they wanted. So now we're screwing around, and they just wanted to see how
fast you went. That's crazy.
Well, you know, back in the day, back in the 90s, do you remember the show Star Search?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So that was Ed McMahon.
Ed McMahon. Well, there was one of the winners on Star Search was a guy who could talk really fast.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I don't even remember him. He was a little guy, mustache, bald.
Was that the Matchbox voiceover? Was he the one?
Yeah, it could be. See,
I think he was,
because back in the
Micro
day,
Machines voiceover.
Back in the day, they didn't have the software to squish it so that we could sound like we could talk really fast. And so they hired fast talkers. And so one of the things that I also did when I first started out was I trained myself to talk really fast. And I did one of those ads for Nickelodeon where I had to do the blah, 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 you know, talk really fast. And so this type of thing was when a client comes up and he says, "Can you do this?" You kind of go, yeah, I can. And because it just happened to be a tool in my toolkit that I haven't used in a while because I haven't had to. And that was so much fun. It was just like, yeah.
That's great. You know, because I do hear, you'll hear ads. I don't know about if you're like this. I'm that person, like when I'm listening to commercials, I like to, you know, not give feedback, but, you know, listen to it and kind of get some, you know, input on what I'm going to do. And I heard one recently. You can tell that they took the copy and or the recording and they sped it up, and you can tell in the production back in the day, like you're saying. I remember watching like ABC, you know, the Who's the Boss, Growing Pains, all those promos. And he always had to redo it over and over and over because they had to be exactly 15 seconds.
And that's the thing. Like, well, see, and I got really good at, you'd have a client come in and go, "Okay, Kasper, we have 1.7 seconds. Can you do it?" And so when you're getting into the point, you know, seconds, you're kind of
right.
You know, thank goodness that software's moved up from that, because that was, but you're right. When you could tell when they've taken it, and this is where now we're getting into like engineering stuff and audio stuff, and smart engineers know where to remove spaces in between words as well, because you can't just take the whole thing and squish it together,
right?
Because it's not going to work.
The tone,
the tone,
and
exactly,
speed and the pitch.
But then you're working with engineers. I was working with a guy the other day, and I'm sure we've all had this, where I screwed up. I ate the T on a word, and so you couldn't hear it. And I said, "Do you need a repeat?" And he goes, "Oh, just a second." And he does, and I go, "What'd you do?" And he goes, "Oh, I grabbed a T from another word." And I went, "What?"
Oh my gosh!
But it's something that I would get there eventually, kind of thing. But
that's all you did, yeah.
And I would just re-record the word, kind of thing. But he went, no, because so it tells you something about how audio engineers think separately than the VO people. Now, when you work as a team, man, you could get some awesome stuff done. But and that's the thing. But I sat back in awe, and I just went, wow, like, but so that's the fun stuff.
Well, so that brings up a good point though, because this recently happened to me. I was recording something where I had to get like really into the role, like serious acting, like I was getting beat up, I was getting punched, I was screaming, and I was doing the live session, but I was recording on my end. And I don't know about you, I wasn't really focusing on the recording, which I should have, because it looked like it kind of went over a lot. Do you agree? It's harder to be both when you really want a 100% job done, when you have to be the one in charge, because you don't know your levels at all time. You can put like, I understand you can do levels, you can control that, but it's not the real deal. Wouldn't you agree?
I do totally, because when I first got into this business, I'm really good on this side of the microphone. Like this is, you know, and when we were asked to do like and I love to play with the toys, and I love to work with professionals. And I like to focus just on the words. So when we were asked to do our own editing, you realize that that's a skill that these guys went to school for. You know, these boys and girls, they went to school for that. And I'm like, I didn't go. So YouTube became my friend. But, you know, my first few sessions, I still do it. I panic sometimes when I'm doing a remote session, because particularly with a session like you were talking about, I had that happen just the other day, where I looked over at my DAW kind of thing, and I looked and I saw, and I was like, oh crap.
You
And
saw
I could see that I'd peaked. And so I said to the client, I go, do you mind if we go back and do this certain thing again? I've went way out. And so I was a bit hot. And so I was, you know, I went and adjusted it. But what I started doing then was second guessing my, you know, it was just that type of read where you're saying, like, when it's a dynamic read, if you know, if it's like an epic read, you know, and you're that, you know, you set your levels, you know where you're at, it's good. But you were saying you were all over the place, so you're like soft, and so you have to. Now there are certain people, and I imagine, you know, Em O'Neill's probably one of those who she knows where she needs to be, you know, away from the mic, but not everybody's like that. And where even if you are, certain mics are different and certain this, and sometimes you just close up the crap out of something.
Well, yeah, if you're doing like a screaming role, like, so I think my thing is going to have to be next time. It's like a learning lesson. That's how we do this business. If it's going to be a screaming role or a you know, character, I might recommend, I have, you know, access to a local studio. How about we do this? We do a live at a studio where I have somebody on the other side who can watch my levels and use those resources, because at the end of the day, it might be more money to come back and redo it again. And every little part matters.
Yeah, because you know it can be done. Because I mean, if we've, like, I've done video games and stuff. I've done stuff where I've had to stand in front of a microphone and yell so loud that my voice, you know, was gone at the end of the session or something. And so you know that they can get the stuff done. And so you're sitting in your little, you know, your playroom or whatever you're recording, and you're thinking, first of all, you're worried, am I going to annoy the neighbors?
Right.
Depending on where you are and what type of studio you have. And so there's that element of, does somebody, can they hear me? Does that matter? Kind of thing. And then there's the second thing of, am I getting it right? Have I, you know, how does it sound, kind of thing. And that's I like remote sessions, but I like working with an engineer. It's sort of like, in a very strange way, audiobooks. The only way I'll do an audiobook these days is if it comes with an engineer attached.
I like that. That's good.
Which might sound kind of sad, but I volunteer for the Royal National Institute for the Blind. I do audiobooks for blind people. I become their go-to Western guy, which is a lot of fun, because you read books that you're not in, but all of their books come with an engineer who's going to, even though it's a remote session, usually on their end, there's somebody you're going along with it. You don't have to do your own editing. They're doing the editing. It makes the book so much more enjoyable as well. I have nothing but respect for audiobook authors who do their own stuff.
Yeah.
That's a skill that that is it's quite good, but it's just not. I like my little snippets, my stuff, you know, even my documentaries and stuff. Very difficult to do all that stuff on your own. You know?
Yeah, it's you know, everybody has the way they like to do it, and I totally respect that. So right now I'm gonna have some fun here with you. It's it's called the Audition Challenge. You ready for the Audition Challenge?
You betcha.
All right, so I send something to you in your chat, and I know how you like to. This is something I think you're gonna like. The reason why I wrote this one is because the other day I was getting ready to sit down at the end of my driveway, and I don't know where this coyote just wanted to come up and hang out in the neighborhood. And I'm like, you know what? We're seeing more and more coyotes, all these wild animals and everything, like, you know, bear going underneath people's houses. I thought this would be kind of fun little copy for you to have fun with.
Do you want it in the good old Don Fontaine style, or
or whatever you think this this one goes. I always tell people, do it how you think it should be.
You know what's? I'm gonna do it. Yeah, I'm gonna have a bit of fun with this one.
Okay, all right.
In a world where nature reigns supreme, humanity faces its wildest challenge yet. Brace yourself for an epic tale of survival as the animal kingdom takes control. Unleash the adventure in Wild Dominion, a gripping novel that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready to surrender to the call of the wild? Pre-order your copy now and embark on a journey like never before. Wild Dominion, because in this untamed world, the struggle for survival has a new ruler.
That was a plus. And I'm Gary. If somebody listens to this, we'll be calling you to do their next narration of Animal Kingdom. Oh my gosh, that was fantastic.
Well, I think that David Attenborough, he's one of those guys where, again, he's like in his 90s now. And he's doing this stuff. There was a guy in our studio a little while ago last year. He was a farmer that they grabbed. They needed a VO for something, and they grabbed some farmer. He's 94, and they brought him into the studio, and they sat him down in front of a microphone. He'd never been in front of this stuff. He'd never done any of this stuff. And he had a blast. They put the copy down in front of him. He had his glasses as thick as Coke bottles, kind of thing. They gave him a coffee, and he was like, "Oh, this is lovely. Thank you so much." And he sat down, and he actually wanted to, he was like, "Oh, are you sure you've got everything? I can do it again."
Oh my gosh.
And he was so natural. And so fun. Was he the best? No, but he was the most natural guy that they grabbed for it. But his joy at just being in the room. And it also said something in our chosen field. We can keep doing this forever. We can do it until we don't want to do it anymore. So like he's in his 90s. So did you want to know about the Blackhawks really quick kind of thing?
Yeah. So you read my mind, but the David Attenborough thing, one thing I was going to say about him, there's voices like, my wife and I talk about this. The guy who did Unsolved Mysteries. When I was a kid, that voice would creep you out. You'd think somebody was outside your house, And David Attenborough, you could see anacondas, and he made you feel relaxed. So it was always something.
My voice, the guy that brings me back, is Bill Curtis.
Okay.
American Justice. In a world where where that guy, and I still do it, where A&E was my go-to show, and Bill Curtis was I'd moved by the time Frontline sort of came around, and Keith Morrison. Now Keith Morrison's Canadian. He came down. He used to do the national news, and he came down to do Frontline. But by the time, or Dateline, or is it Dateline or Frontline? I think it's Frontline.
Yes.
And by the time he started doing that, I was in the UK, so I sort of missed that. But Bill Curtis was my go-to. His voice was just, he was one of the guys who made me want to get into voiceover. Everybody has their Mel Blancs and their stuff who were like their cartoon character voices. But that guy who stood, and the way every show was sort of how he'd kind of pull you in, and the way how he highlighted certain scenes and made things seem much more pending and doom, than they actually were. I love that guy.
Absolutely. And before our time's up, I would love to hear. Like I said, I grew up 25 miles outside St. Louis, big Blues fan, and the Blackhawks. That was around the time Eddie Belfour was around there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's actually, that's the thing. So okay, really quick.
You're a hockey player.
Yeah, you grew up in the middle of Canada. I grew up in Saskatchewan, in Canada, a little town called Weyburn. Pardon me, puberty. Little town, and it's one of these places where they train you to skate before you can walk, kind of thing, and it's every kid's dream to be an ice hockey player, and and so I found out there was a lot of things that happened when I was there. But one of the things I found out was that just because you're good at something doesn't you enjoy it. Hockey there was a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff going on. But one of the things I don't tell you about the draft is when you're drafted into the NHL, at least during the 80s, they don't tell you. They tell your parents, they tell your coach, they don't tell you. And so unless an adult sits you down and tells you you're going to be drafted, you don't actually find out. I found out on the day of the draft. I was a ninth round draft pick, and which is pretty good, I think, at the time. I was a centerman. I was not very tall. I was quick. I was quick little bugger. And I was drafted to the Blackhawks in 1983, and 2 weeks after I was drafted, I was hit by a motorcycle.
Oh my gosh.
And that ended tore all the muscles in my neck, and I did some yucky stuff and wrecked my knee. And it was at that time that I found out that everything that I built my foundations on were really shaky, kind of thing. And also I found out that when you grow up in a small town and you're the guy who gets drafted, you might not have as many friends as you think, because, and I found this out later from one of the guys I played with. He goes, don't get me wrong, you were a nice guy and everything like that, but we hated you. We absolutely hated you, because not all of us wanted to go to the NHL. So we just wanted to goof around. And so we would go to practices with you, and you worked hard. And so the coach you never saw it because you were always off doing other things, but the coaches were always pointing at you going, we want you to do that. And the other players were like, oh man, no. And so so when you see that coming, you kind of went, that kind of took some of the joy out of what I was doing. But it also made me realize that there were so many other things that you could do. It's actually, I fell into acting totally by accident after that. I was in college, and I just went and saw a play in Vancouver, and I come back to Vancouver, and I thought, that I could maybe do that, because I had no idea what I was going to do after hockey. I had none. And so I turned to the guy beside me and I go, do you know any theater companies here in town? And he looked at me and he went, is that a joke? And I went, no. And he opens up his briefcase and he says, I'm the publicity director for this theater company. We're having auditions tomorrow night. Why don't you come out? He hands me this flyer.
Oh my! See, it happened for a reason. Unfortunately, the bad reason. But yeah.
Well, no, and so I ended up being an actor, and I got into acting and I was one of those guys who, I said to the teacher, I said, look, I'll be a color, I'll be an animal. Don't ask me to be a tree. It's not going to happen.
Oh my gosh.
I said, I don't want to be a tree. And from there, the acting stuff came in. But also, before we go, because you were talking about the audition, I just wanted to, my first audition for VO, I get called in. I get told by my agent, I've never done anything like this before. I get told by my agent, they want you to be a robot for this thing. It's some new cartoon or something coming up. I went, a robot. Okay. So I can do that. So I went and did all my best HAL 9000 voices and R2D2s and the day the Earth starts, every robot I could think of, I'm coming up with. So I'm all prepared, and I go in, and the producer and the writer are sitting there across from me. At least I think that's who they were. And they said, okay, do you know what this is for? And I said, well, no. And they said, well, it's a new Hot Wheels cartoon. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, do you know the show Gilligan's Island? And I said, yes. And they said, do you know Thurston Howell III? And I went, what, Jim Backus? The guy, Mr. Magoo? And they said, yeah. And I said, yes. And they said, can you do Thurston Howell III? And I went, badly, probably. And I said, to be honest with you, I wasn't what I was thinking. And they went, yeah, can you just do that? So they wanted me to deliver the lines like Thurston Howell. So everything that I've come prepared for is out the window. So I start doing the lines, and they start peeing themselves laughing, and I don't know what's going on. And so I finished the read, and then I did it again. And then they said, okay, we're going to play you something. Just have a listen. And they they said, no, here's one read, and it was the same lines. And then they played another one. They said, now listen to this one. Which one is you? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, the first one was actually you. The second one is this idiot here, who is one of the producers. And they said that when he first did his character, he chose to give him the voice of Jim Backus.
Oh,
and
wow.
What's happened with this new cartoon is he's too busy. He can't do the character anymore. So they need someone to pick up where he left off. So they needed a voice double. So we didn't tell anybody so we just brought them in to see if they could do it. So I ended up getting my very first audition for a cartoon because I could do a really bad Thurston Howell the third.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
But I walked out of that room and it totally changed everything. My acting auditions after that, my voice auditions after that, I went, don't go in with preconceived ideas. Just be prepared.
That is amazing.
Be prepared for everything. And it's changed how I do all my stuff now, because now I don't even worry about auditions. In fact, people started to go, we don't really like auditioning with you because you seem so relaxed when you go in. I go, yeah, because you just do your best.
That's amazing. Well, it's so crazy. Our time has flown by so quick. I mean, this went by. I had a blast. I hope you had a blast.
I did have a blast.
Yes.
If you ever want me back.
Absolutely. And again, for those real quick, how can we find you on the World Wide Web?
The World Wide Web. I'm the only Kasper Michaels with a K on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or as well, just KasperMichaels.com will get you to my webpage.
I love it. Kasper Michaels, thank you so much for being on Behind the Audition podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening in on Behind the Audition podcast, made possible by Hilton Productions. If you need a male or female voiceover, contact us at hiltonproductions.com. Hilton Productions, let our voices do the selling.